Hey there, my name's Kylie and I'm the maker of all things St. Roger Street, and I'm super excited you're here. Today is an exciting day because it is the beginning of something new for St. Roger Street. So basically, ever since I started this business 3 years ago, it's been a dream of mine to create video tutorials to teach you guys how to embroider your own home portraits. And I'm finally doing that starting today, after a long-awaited 3 years. So I am super excited. I hope you are too to learn, and let's just go ahead and jump right in. So to begin, I always like to start with the main portions of the home, which is usually either siding or brick. This house happens to be siding. And so when it comes to siding, the first step is going to be laying a foundation, which is basically just imagine your thread is like a marker and we're just coloring in the home. So we are going to satin stitch the entire face of the home, and the way or the direction you're going to want to stitch that is the opposite direction of which your siding is going. So for example, on this home, my siding is the lines go in the direction of horizontally from left to right. So because they are horizontal, I'm going to be stitching vertically from top to bottom. By doing so, by making these opposite, it will just allow your lines of definition and your lines of siding to stand out a bit more and pop and not get blended in or mixed in with that base layer of satin stitches. And so as you can see, that's what I'm doing here. Now that my base layer is completed, I'm going to go ahead and add in those tiny details of the siding, those horizontal lines that I was talking about. And so to begin, I'm starting on the garage, and I am just pulling my thread up through the hoop and then holding it so that I can eyeball how straight it is to the left side. And I'm going to do that like every couple of millimeters just to create that siding type effect. And I think it's important to note here that there are different portions of the home, and I want to do my best to respect that in my hoop so that it can most fulfill what the house looks like. And so the way I'm doing that is the garage actually stands out a bit, and then the house is like dented backwards a bit, and the windows are also popped out forward. So that kind of gives you an idea of the depth and dimension of this house, and so I want to be able to show that in my piece. And to do that, what I'm doing is, you can see I'm not crossing this line here between the house and between the garage, and so you can't really see it in this video, but there is a line from my pattern that segregates the two, and I kind of have to move the strands of thread to be able to see that. And then also, for any perfectionists out there, like, these lines do not have to be perfect, and like, if you do mess up or one is really crooked, just simply remove it and put it back. But I don't do anything special to like achieve this look, I just eyeball it. One last thing to note here is, as you can see, like on the bush, whenever I'm bringing my string over, it's okay to overlap on top of that empty space, because it's going to get filled with French knots. And also, like, if you don't bring your thread far enough across, it will kind of pull that base layer of satin stitches in, and we don't want that, or else it will kind of create a gap in there. Now I'm going to focus on my windows, and so typically I actually do my windows first thing. I just got a little bit carried away and jumped right into this hoop, but no worries, you can do whatever you want in whatever order you want. I personally usually just stick to kind of the order I'm showing, except for the windows. As you can see here, I am using watercolor paint. I like to use something different than thread just because I think it gives a different depth and kind of gives it that like window looking like look. I'm using watercolor paint. It's nothing fancy, just something from Walmart. And to activate it, I am dipping my paintbrush in a little tin of water and then rubbing my paintbrush on the black paint to activate it. As you can see, like, my painting skills are totally not perfect here. These are not perfect rectangles, and that's totally a-okay, because what's going to happen next is after it's dried, I'm going to come back and stitch the windows and the trim in, and that will finish it and give it a better like rectangular or boxy look to it. Next up, I'm going to be working on my garage. So what I'm going to do here is create a base layer of satin stitches with that same thread. Now I'm going to come in with the detailing on my garage to create those little boxes that we just saw on my pattern and on my transfer. And this is totally optional. I just like to go for the maximum amount of details that I can fit on, but I also think the garage looks totally great without these little details, so it's up to you as to how much you want to add. And so what I'm doing here is I am just adding some tiny horizontal straight stitches that kind of outline what those cubes on the garage look like. And so I'm going to do this across and underneath all of the windows until it's complete. Next up, I'm just going to add a few more tiny details to my garage. Using the straight stitch, I am going to border the bottom of each window, and then I'm going to also add a piece of trim to the top of it to cap it off. After the main portion of the house is done, I like to do the next biggest portion, which is usually the roof. And so here I'm going to show you how I typically stitch my roofs for a shingled type look. And what I'm doing here is just adding straight stitches across the roof and kind of like in rows all the way down the roof as well. And again, lucky for me, this house, the roof, I'm just using one color because I always base my home portraits off of what I see in the picture, and this roof just looked exactly one color. However, if your roof has multiple colors, what I would do is continue doing what I'm doing, but just leave some empty gaps and then come in with one color, leave empty gaps, and then the second time come in with a different color and fill those gaps. And so this is only the base layer. I will come back with another little layer that will help give it that shingled roof type look. To add those tiny roof details, what I'm going to do is come up with one strand of thread and create some straight stitches to help give the shingles a bit more of a boxy look. And so to do that, I am going to come up every half a centimeter or so, I would say. And at first, I'm going to come up and line it up to like the pitch angle of the roof. And then gradually, as I get towards like the center of the garage, I'm going to center it out and make my stitches here like completely vertical. And then once I get to the left of the home, I'm going to angle it again to the left to line up with that side of the roof lines, just to give it like the correct depth and the correct look, as if you were looking at it from the front angle view as we are. Now that my roof is done, I am going to pick and choose kind of what I want to do next, just kind of on preference, because it doesn't really necessarily matter too much the order, but I am making some pretty long satin stitches vertically, but you can kind of do this based on whatever the picture is you're looking at and how you can best fulfill or like recreate the look of your door or your windows or whatever. And now I'm coming in with my white trim around the door, and again, I'm just mimicking whatever I see in my photo to recreate it to the best of my ability and add those as many details as I can. So here I'm just adding a few straight stitches around it to border it. Next, I'm going to add the trim around my windows. So to do this again, I'm coming up with my thread and creating some satin stitches around the border. Usually I fill it in with either like 2 or 3 satin stitches, depending on how wide or how slim the trim is. And then whenever it comes to, like, you know, on windows, there's usually the opening for it to slide open, or those tiny little white detail lines. I love adding those because I think it just adds like the cutest little detail. But yeah, with that, we do have to stitch over the watercolor paint that we added to the window. And so with that, I kind of recommend getting in, get your stitch in there and get done, because if you do mess with it too much, or if you have to redo it, sometimes the watercolor paint can kind of be a little flaky or like create some crusties and so you don't really want to do that. So get your stitch in there, get done, and you're good to go. To embroider the stitches, what I'm going to do is simply satin stitch them all together, and once I get the box satin stitch, I'm going to add 3 straight stitches, 1 horizontal straight stitch to the top, 1 to the bottom, and 1 to the middle to add those tiny little details. Now we are on to my favorite part of embroidering a home portrait, and that is outlining. So here I'm actually going to satin stitch my gutters, and then after my gutters are done, I'm going to add straight stitches to basically like the entire border of my home. And when it comes to the roof, I'm going to outline it with the roof color, and then typically I would outline the sides of my house, like the color of the siding, but this home actually had some like down pipes that were the same burgundy color, and I chose to go with the burgundy on this one just because I think it helps outline the house a bit more. So now I'm just gonna kind of stitch up anything that's left as we're getting to like basically not much being left. And so what I'm going to do here is basically color with some satin stitches. I'm going to satin stitch the concrete under the garage. I'm going to satin stitch the stairs, and then I like to divide them with straight stitches to kind of define them. Next, I'm going to outline my windows and my garage. And lastly, I'm going to color with satin stitches the lights on my home, and that pretty much brings the house to a wrap. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you learned lots and found this video helpful in creating your own home portrait. If you did enjoy this video, would you go ahead and hit that like button, as it does help and support my YouTube channel. And before we go, I just wanted to make you aware of an offering in my shop. So in my shop, I offer custom home portrait PDF patterns. So in a nutshell, you send me a photo of your home and I will turn it into a PDF pattern, setting you up for some stitching success. And so all you have to do is download, print, and transfer it onto your hoop, and you are good to go. So I'll leave the link for that in the description below. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. If you do have any comments or questions or inquiries of like specific things about home portraits or questions or any techniques I use, go ahead and ask those below, and I would be happy to answer them and help you in any ways that I can. Be sure to be on the lookout for my next videos that will be related to home portraits and teaching you all about them and how to create them. Yeah, I am so glad you're here. I had so much fun. I hope you did too. And until next time, my friends, happy stitching.